5 minutes, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Mann, recently the Biden administration has looked to antitrust as a way to fight inflation. For example, in relation to oil and gas, and also concerning, as we were just speaking about, agriculture and meat prices. Senator Warren said firms are too big, that Congress should expand antitrust laws and we should break up the big grocers. Another proposal is amending Section 7 of the Clayton Act. Others have said antitrust is too focused on consumers and prices and instead should focus on a number of conflicting goals. Even some economists, including Larry Summers, Jason Furman, have characterized this as a distinction from Biden administration's worsening supply chain crisis. Is it accurate that expanding antitrust laws as proposed by some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle would simply reduce supply while stimulating demand, which obviously would be a recipe for more inflation?
No, it's a good point. I think there's a couple of things to mention here. Number one, I think it's notable that Senator Warren's call to break up big grocers was aimed particularly at Kroger, which has about a 10% market share. And I think, and it operates in a very competitive market. It's really strains credulity to think that presents an antitrust problem that we should be addressing, and that the cure won't be worse than the disease. But I think, to your point, all of the sort of suggested interventions that we've been talking about today, aimed at or responding in the first place to increase prices. Everything I hear today suggests solutions that would further increase prices. Now, there may be very good policy reasons to do that. It may be an important idea to protect farmers in certain circumstances, to protect the environment, to adopt regulations that have the effect of increasing prices, but they will have that effect. And I think that's the most important thing to keep in mind. That doesn't mean that the policies are inherently bad. It does mean, though, that those policies are raising prices. Now, if you're looking for things that raise prices, antitrust intervention into competitive markets is certainly one of them. So I think it's incumbent on us to acknowledge those consequences of some of the regulations we've seen. That doesn't mean they're inherently bad, but let's acknowledge what the consequences are.
Very good, thank you. If I could turn to Dr. St. Onge. Doctor, you have significant experience and expertise in inflation-related issues and supply chain. So I'm so glad that you're here today. It seems that this hearing would be better off examining how the president's favoritism towards unions is backing up the ports right now. I mean, that's real. That's a real thing that's happening out there. In how I think in more of an ancillary way or a more comprehensive way, environmental regulations have had an impact on the rising price of food and an overall effect on the supply chain. Could you give some examples of how those policies, rather than industry concentration, better explain the inflation that we see today?
Absolutely. Thank you. That's a great question. California really kind of makes the case on regulations, how they contribute to the supply chain crisis. There are really two areas there, labor and emissions. And those two together, they directly attack the supply chain at just about every stage. Truckers, railroads, warehouse workers, retail workers, all of these groups are affected by their labor mandates that can drive up the cost to employers, therefore making it harder for them to employ more people. They can also, in California, for example, under the CARB standards on truck emissions, those hit at the wrong time. They effectively took actually the majority of trucks in the country out of commission when it comes to the state of California. They actually wait at the border of California. They have to wait for a truck that's allowed in California to come to the border, which is about 4 hours. They transship, and then that compliant truck goes back. This is insane during the worst supply chain crisis in a generation. And of course, the concern is that those California regulations, there are Democrats in Congress who are interested in taking those nationwide. On the labor side, with the PRO Act, which does not look like passing at the moment, and on emissions, the EPA has expressed interest in bringing California emission standards over the rest of the country. If that occurs, that could spread the supply chain crisis far beyond California, which is key, but it's not the whole country. That could spread it across the country.
Thank you,
The
Mr.
time of the
Barr.
gentleman has
Are you
expired.
done?
I will say, as I recognize the next witness, I will say, Mr. Manny, I don't think the antitrust subcommittee has ever heard testimony that claims antitrust interventions raise prices.